Well, hello there. This is Bruce Sussman coming to you with a live broadcast from the SecureWorld remote headquarters. That's the way a lot of us are still working, right? Fantastic to have you here today as we discuss a crucial question after a crazy week in cybersecurity. And the question is, should ransomware payments be outlawed? And I'm really excited to have a fantastic guest with us today. It's Shawn Tuma, who is co-chair of data privacy and the cybersecurity practice at Spencer Fane. And as I like to say, Shawn deals with ransomware every day of the week, which sadly, I think Shawn, sometimes that's like 7 days a week. Is that right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So, the threat actors do not take off on weekends and holidays. And that means that, being in what we call like a first responder role with these types of things, it means we got to be ready whenever we get the call, the text, the email, tweet, whatever. Got to get ready to go.
Yeah, that's crazy. Well, thank you. And it's going to be interesting to hear your perspective, because I know you're right there in the middle with organizations that are responding to ransomware, and they need your help. And by the way, Shawn, also want to say thank you for being an advisory council member at our SecureWorld Dallas community. So we appreciate that. And, before we get started, Shawn, stand by for just a second, because before we get started with our conversation, let's just think about for a minute what's happened this past week. First of all, the cyber world impacted the real world, right? And millions of people who were looking for gas and wondering about fuel, and flights were diverted. They rarely or never think about ransomware, right? But they were talking about it and they were asking about it. Even my extended family this week, people, know that I'm in this role, right? And said, tell me again, what is ransomware exactly? Like it hit Main Street, right? More than possibly ever before. And then all of us got a reminder of what is at stake unless we can slow the momentum of groups that launch ransomware attacks. So those are just some of the things that I think happened over this past week as a result of the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack, which ended up, the collateral damage was shutting down 40% of the transport of fuel that is transported along the eastern seaboard. What did I miss, Shawn, in that list? What's another fallout, you think?
You really nailed this, Bruce. I've been in cyber law since 1999. I've seen all kind of events, trends, you name it. I remember in 2011 writing an article about, is this the year of the data breach? The time that it becomes part of our normal everyday vocabulary. It wasn't. It wasn't until 2013, 2014 when Target, Home Depot, Neiman Marcus, all these companies got hit at once. It really brought it home to the everyday citizen of what a data breach was. I believe this event this week, or last week now, Colonial Pipeline, is that watershed moment for cybersecurity as a whole, for ransomware, and for putting it into everyday's, conversation. And that's for all the negativity that's going on with this, and there's certainly a lot of it for good reason, that is a positive, because what we saw with data breach and the understanding of it, I think we're going to see with ransomware. So you really summed it up nicely. When our family's talking about it, that's a good thing.
Right. I mean, it is a positive, right? Because we know security is everybody's job, and that is every end user everywhere. So, okay, that's great. I'm glad to hear your perspective on that. Now, I tell us a little bit about your role, because I understand that organizations call you, right, when they're having an incident, a cyber incident, and increasingly this is ransomware. You and I have talked about this before. And then lay out for us, paint a picture. How significant is this ransomware threat right now for our organizations?
So my role is, there's many terms for it: cybersecurity counsel, privacy counsel, breach quarterback, incident response coach, you name it. My role in practical terms is to be somewhat like the conductor of a symphony that comes in when there's this issue, to work with cyber insurance providers, to work with forensics firms, to work with PR firms, to work with data decryption negotiation firms, all of this, and to do so with a view towards the legal issues, the practical business issues, and then obviously the technical issues, which everyone appreciates and understands. And so in that role, I don't put fingers on keyboards, if you will, but I help make sure that the right people are at the table, that the right approvals are needed, that the right claims are made, that we have the right professionals who understand. In a ransomware case, no, we don't need a call Monday. We need a call in 15 minutes. We need to be moving within the next hour, and all of those things. And so that's really what my role is to oversee and to ensure that works properly. As to the point about the impact of where on companies, it's simple. I believe cybersecurity, and especially ransomware, is the single greatest threat that companies face as we sit here today. More than COVID shutdown, more than all of fluctuating currency, all these other things. This is the biggest issue because this is literally the one scenario short of maybe nuclear war where you go to bed tonight, your company's doing great, finances are doing great, operations. You wake up tomorrow morning with a call from your CISO saying we are now shut down. Our company is out of business until we get this resolved. That's big.
Yeah, that is huge. And based on your work, I mean, kind of describe for us before we get to our big question of what we should do about this problem and where the payments and the flow of money should be cut off or what that should look like. What do you think was going on inside the walls, at Colonial Pipe this week, based on your experience with other companies? I mean, what is it like for the security teams or the IT teams or the executives who are going through a ransomware attack?
So at first, it's shock. It's like, it's we don't believe this is really happening. No, surely it's something else. Restart the servers, whatever. Did you make sure it's plugged in? All of those kind of things, because it's a surreal experience. I mean, this is worst case scenario, and far too many companies still think it can't happen to them because they're investing, they're doing a good, pretty decent job, and there are all these reasons they think it can't happen to them. So first step is going to be shock. They're going to be absolutely floored by the notion that this literally just happened to us. The next step is they're going to look for other possible alternatives. The next step is they're going to realize this is a ransomware attack. They're going to probably see the note from the threat actor saying you must now contact us to negotiate so we can help you through this, and sadly at that point, many times they turn to the internal IT team and they start blaming and pointing fingers and scaring the hell out of everybody, which then makes everybody tense up and they're not thinking rationally. They're now thinking panic because they haven't prepared for this moment, right? And so that's when you see your internal team, they may hurry up and say, oh, well, let's hurry up. We've got backups. Let's wipe our servers. Let's wipe our network. Let's get our backups online. It's Friday. If we start right now, we can get it done by Monday, that type of thing. Then they discover they don't have viable backups because the threat actors know backups are the kryptonite here, right? So they get in and they infect or forensically delete your backups before you ever get hit. And so now, sadly, most people haven't practiced this. They haven't put a plan in place for this. And so it's from there that they start trying to fix it themselves, and they create a lot of problems and cause damage that can't be undone later. And so, there's a lot of blame there, and there's more fear than anything else. And that's what I wish people would do as they're sitting here listening to this, is project yourself into that position. Say, what would it really feel like? And then let's start today by doing some things to keep us from ever getting there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you for taking us inside that and those words of caution. Really appreciate that, Shawn. Okay. So, I was, as we're looking at this landscape, right? And as you said, lots of people are talking about this now. This could be a watershed moment. I mean, In some ways, we thought the same thing, like after the Equifax breach. You know more than I do over what the shifts were and what kind of changes came out of that. And here we are again, faced with this breach now. What kind of changes will come out of it? A couple of things that have led us to our big question today over whether we should cut off the flow of money and make it illegal to pay hackers ransom. Here's one thing that happened in North Carolina this week. Which, by the way, GasBuddy.com had like over 60% of the North Carolina gas stations reporting they were out of gas, right? So this is the epicenter of the impact, I guess you could say, from the Colonial Pipeline attack. A new legislative bill was introduced that would make it illegal for state and local governments to pay a hacker's ransom. And you know what? It already got traction and was moving out of committee like lightning speed, right? So that was one element. Here's another element. That has taken place just in the last week and a half. And this was from the Insurance Journal. In an apparent industry first, the global insurance company AXA said Thursday it will stop writing cyber insurance policies in France. So this is localized to France for now, that reimburse customers for extortion payments made to ransomware criminals. In other words, they're not going to write policies that pay a hacker's ransom if you get attacked. And that's only in France right now. But, could these be signs? And is there talk within the industry that we need to do something around the money that is flowing to hackers, Shawn?
So let's start with a basic proposition. We've got this thing called the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act that makes hacking illegal. You're not supposed to hack. So we shouldn't have any of this problem, right? When does making something illegal actually stop the activity? My concern is, I've got a lot of concerns with this notion of making it illegal to pay ransoms. But just from that first pragmatic standpoint, if someone's, so when do companies pay ransoms, right? Let's start with that. They don't pay ransoms because they want to. They pay them because they have to. Usually it means their data has been encrypted, their backups are not viable for whatever reason, and they're faced with a existential situation of either we're in business or we're out of business. That's why they're in that position. And so telling them at that point that they can't pay it, I think if they have the means available, whether it's then it would probably be privately. They're going to find a way. There's going to be a black market pop up for this kind of stuff, because they're faced with a no-win situation at that point. So I don't think that aspect helps. The other thing is companies that have insurance do, and I see we have a question on that. If the funds are there to pay it, and you have that's what you bought the insurance for, and you can do the proper clearances and things of that nature, I would say the companies will be more likely to pay it, because some really may not have the funds available otherwise. And so I think I think the problem goes much deeper than this, though. And if we see, like we had the same legislation pop up in Texas about making it illegal for state and schools to pay. And I just looked at it right before, and I think the bill's been amended to have that removed. So I'm not sure on the status of that. But the problem is, it's not like companies are doing this because they want to. It's because they have to. And so if we tell them you can and we make it impossible for them to do that, we've got to now deal with the fact of, what about all the jobs we're going to lose because this company is going to shut down? What about the impact that's going to have? And so I think while I get the policy issues, and I'm sympathetic to it, and I agree, if we could shut off the money, then it will stem the tide of this, right? It's like shutting off the fuel to literally, to an engine. It's going to stop it from running. But in this situation, I think we also have to have the humility to realize something. And I'm going to borrow from an article I just wrote in Ethical Boardroom called, humility in cybersecurity. We have to realize that none of us are immune from this. And these threat actors, I mean, for God's sakes, they've hit FireEye, not with a ransomware attack, but with a successful cyber attack. They hit SolarWinds. They've hit Microsoft. You know, if they're not immune from this, how are any of us immune from this? And if we're not immune from it, it means that at some level we could all fall victim to this. So until we can get security, maybe we'll never get 100%, 80, 90%. Then what choice are we given?
Yeah, well, I mean, you raised some great points, Shawn. You raised some great points. I want to push back on one thing as we look at this statistic. This is from the Ransomware Task Force report that came out just a couple of weeks ago now. So it's hot off the presses. And I know that you deal with the number of days it takes to determine, different things in recovery and start operations, et cetera, and recovery 287 days. I mean, that's incredible. But $350 million was the amount, according to Chainalysis, that U.S. organizations have paid in 2020 to hackers. I mean, this is not a small amount of money. It's become a huge business. And so my question is to you, if we don't cut off the money, what do you say we do instead to, thwart the business model of these attackers? What else can we do?
I wish I knew that answer, Bruce. I mean, I know the answer. We all know the answer. The answer is improved security and improved resilience planning. And so that means let's all understand, number one, none of us are immune. So let's get our cyber risk management programs in place. Let's follow the steps we need to improve our security to the highest level we reasonably can under our circumstances. Then let's do resilience planning. Let's say, okay, we've done everything reasonably possible, but we know they will still find a way to get in if they're incentivized enough and determined. What do we do when that happens? Put ourselves in that position. That means having our backups, having our redundant backups, our 3-2-1 backup policy or whatever, one set offline away. Let's encrypt our sensitive personal information so that if they do exfil it, there's nothing for them to disclose and extort us with there. But what does that require? That requires knowing what sensitive information we even have. Most organizations don't know that. They don't know what it is, where it is, how it got into their environment, how it's processed, how it leaves the environment, because they're not thinking about this. So these are all things we could do to also shut off this business model, but we're not doing them. So I get the policy argument, and from a personal view, it makes me sick to see it and to think about it happening of these payments. And philosophically, to think we are funding some very bad things. We're funding more of this, and like it or not, at some level, we're funding terrorism through this. I know it. We all know it.
Yeah, that's so challenging. Yeah, I sense your frustration. I mean, that is really interesting. One of the things that Tom said, and I think this was an interesting comment, and we don't know for sure if they paid, but reportedly there were reports that Colonial Pipe paid up to $4 million, right? But let's say we don't know, but we know other companies do pay. Do you think that, does it save money to pay the ransom? Do you see this with your clients, or, what is it case by case? What's the situation?
Yeah, it's case by case, right? So there's a lot of talk of the business decision that gets made, where a company says, you know what, we have backups. We could recover. We could wipe our network, restart, rebuild, restore our backups, and be back up and running by, say, next Friday or the Friday following that. And then they also say, but you know what, if we pay the ransom, then we'll get the decryptor, we'll run those through the weekend, and then we may be up and running Monday morning and nobody ever knew this happened. That gets talked about a lot. It does happen on occasions, especially if there is insurance that's going to step in and pay that amount. But It's incredibly rare. And I'll tell you, the insurance companies, in my experience, are not eager to do that. They take paying ransoms incredibly serious. It's not a whimsical decision by them. It requires a lot of vetting and a lot of checking the box, starting first with OFAC, which I know we'll cover here in a minute. But so there is that business decision that has been made in cases and that does get made, but it's much, much rare. Most companies have a visceral, personal, through their executives' reaction to the notion of paying these bad guys. And so usually it's a you don't have an option scenario.
Okay, so your back's against a wall, and the things that you talked about, which we could do to kind of mitigate the risk up front, often not done. And here we go, we're in the middle of this attack. Okay, you mentioned OFAC for a second. So this is a law or a rule that says we can't pay ransom to groups that we know are tied to terrorism. But in reality, for the most part, we don't always know who these threat actors are or where they're based, right? So you're kind of paying blindly in some cases, do you think, Shawn, or what's the legal ramifications of doing that?
So we don't know anything for certain in the cyber world. So I'll just say that, and we all know that. The OFAC requirements are that you can't pay a known terrorist group or a group affiliated with a known terrorist group without first going to the FBI, going to the DOJ, going to Treasury, and getting a pass, if you will, a license to do it on a case-by-case basis. I'm not aware firsthand of any such licenses having been given at this point. But so I'll tell you the way we handle it is we work with, there's a few companies in the US that their expertise is in interacting with these threat actors, negotiating with them, and facilitating payments to them through cryptocurrency. And they put together very impressive data and a database of information about each case they handle, and they're handling at least hundreds of these cases a month. And so when we approach them, if we know the file extension for the encrypted data, we can give them that file extension. And because certain threat actor groups use certain variants of ransomware, they can look at that variant and say, okay, this is X variant. We know that this is the threat actor group that's running that variant. And then they'll have a pretty detailed database of information about who they are. I mean, not personally, but what's known about them, what their demands are, how they negotiate, how quickly they respond, whether if you pay them, they actually will come through and give you a functional decryptor. All of this information about these threat actor groups. And so we'll go to them and have them go in and do all the diligence they can do on Bitcoin wallet and where payments have gone in the past, channels of communication, to try to determine, is this one of these groups on the prohibited transactions list? Mm-hmm. And then they'll provide a report going through the analysis, and then they'll be the ones that facilitate that payment. And so the insurance carriers won't even talk about paying until you've already gotten past that OFAC clearance.
So you're kind of doing like almost like a business analysis and a threat analysis of who you're paying and what we know about them and what are their business practices, et cetera. So that's phenomenal. That's really interesting. Okay, so I want to let everybody know, if you're watching on the live stream or if you're watching after the fact, that we have ongoing coverage at SecureWorldExpo.com of this story. And one of our lead stories today is a quote from a gentleman who his firm did a study on Colonial Pipe. It was an information governance audit, actually. And the quote from that stuck out was an 8th grader could have hacked Colonial Pipe. Now, again, that's from a few years ago. The question lingers is what has been done since then. Also, I want to let you know about our next Secure World virtual conference coming up June 10th. That's SecureWorld Gov Ed, and you can register for that at SecureWorldExpo.com. Now, Shawn, before you go, I want to read one
Wait,
statement.
is it time already? You just signed on, man.
We were just getting rolling. Are you kidding me? Time flies when you're having fun, right? As they say. Okay, so before you go, I want to read one statement and get one thought from you on this. And this is from the very first couple of sentences of the Ransomware Task Force report that just was released from their executive summary. And this is what it says. Ransomware attacks present an urgent national security risk around the world. This evolving form of cybercrime, through which criminals remotely compromise computer systems and demand a ransom in return for restoring and or not exposing data, is economically destructive and leads to dangerous real-world consequences that far exceed the cost of the ransom payments alone. You agree with that statement? Is it too dramatic? What are your thoughts?
Oh no, I think this is the biggest crisis we're facing right now. I mean, this is more destructive in some ways than the economic impacts of the pandemic over the last year, I believe, just because of what I see. I don't think it's overhyping at all. I think, companies, that they've got to be humble. They've got to realize you are not secure. You are never secure. You've got to do every single thing you can within reason to be more secure. And then you've got to plan for that inevitable situation, maybe where this happens to you, and be resilient. You got to follow the advice of the great Rocky Balboa. Life ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. And look, I don't know that we may not phase things into a time where we do make such things prohibited, but we can't just immediately do it. So you mentioned the situation in France. The reason AXA stopped writing those policies is because the government of France said you're not allowed to pay these. And so they don't want to have a policy, an insurance policy, where the insureds think they have a right to go have it paid when the government's saying you can't. We need to use this as a learning opportunity, and maybe there are other measures that can be taken from a legal or a governmental standpoint that will encourage more education, more effort, more truly caring about security, that'll get us to a point of being as secure as we need to be, which will never really be, right? Because look, all ransomware is, all computer hacking, computer crime is a reflection of human nature doing bad things to make money using new tools. So guess what? When we think we've solved the ransomware problem, you think these people are just going to go away and we're done. Yeah, let's go, start sweeping floors and doing those jobs. No, they're going to have evolved to some new level of attack that's going to be just as harmful, just as destructive. Mm-hmm. So the real answer lies in security, protection, and resilience planning, hopefully, so we don't end up in that situation. And look, people, for God's sakes, realize everything you do on the internet is being tracked by someone somewhere. You may think you're using offline browsing or, whatever privacy mode. You don't think they're going to start extorting you for all this stuff one day, for the sites you're visiting, the things you're doing? Look, be ready. We don't know where they're going, but wherever they are going, we know it's going to be something worse than what we're seeing today.
Yeah, well, that's not exactly the optimistic note I wanted to end on, but I appreciate that idea that it is a constant cat and mouse, right? And you want to be the strongest cat possible against the mice, right? And you got the Rocky Balboa quote in there, so that was good.
I always got to channel my inner Rocky, man.
I love that. And by the way, I think that we have, as we wrap up this live broadcast, we do have a special birthday wish to hand out today, because Chuck Brooks You probably know him. He's very well known on social media and LinkedIn, and a cybersecurity author and thought leader and everything else. And Shawn, I know you're friends with him. He couldn't make it because he was doing something today. What's going on?
Not just friends. We're fellow cyber Avengers, and Chuck is Thor. And today's Chuck's birthday. So I want to throw a little happy birthday shout out to Chuck, and everybody go wish him a happy birthday.
Yes, you can wish him a happy birthday on LinkedIn. And I think he's 29 again. So that's fantastic. He stays so young. Anyway, hey, thank you so much, Shawn. This was a valuable conversation. We'll see what comes of this. I was thinking about a guest we had on our podcast last week who said you should never let a disaster go to waste. Let's hope we don't waste this situation. So thanks so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Keep up the great work at SecureWorld.
All right. We will do the best we can. And again, the ongoing coverage continues at secureworldexpo.com. And you can find the latest on our conference schedule and everything else that we're up to, podcasts, webinars, etc. So thanks for being here and being part of this live SecureWorld broadcast. We'll catch you next time.